The fires had been lit in every room of Ashcroft Hall, and the smell of beeswax and wood smoke moved through the corridors the way Felicity remembered it from childhood. Warm and familiar and entirely wrong, because the house was no longer hers and the fires were not lit for her. She stood in the entrance hall with a cloth in her hands, polishing the brass rail of the staircase she had once slid down on Christmas mornings. And she kept her eyes on her work. 4 years. 4 years since Lawrence Pembury had stood in front of a solicitor's desk in London and produced a will no one had seen before, dated 3 months before her father's death, signed in shaking letters that were meant to look like her father's hand and did not quite, not to Felicity's eyes. 4 years since a judge had looked at her, 20 years old, with no money and no counsel she could afford, and decided that Lawrence's papers were in order. She had been put out of Ashcroft Hall with a trunk and a letter of condolence from a man who had never once looked at her face while he delivered it. Now she was back, under the name of Weston, her mother's maiden name, one that no one in this house would think to connect to anything. She had come back as the new housekeeper. The previous one had left in the autumn. The solicitor who had once acted for her father, old Mr. Fairweather, still had connections to the household, and he had arranged it quietly, with the gravity of a man who believed he owed her something. What she needed was in the library. She was nearly certain of it. Her father had told her, once, in the last summer before he died, that the things which truly mattered were kept behind the things that only seemed to. She had been 17, and had not understood him. She understood him now. She polished the brass rail and waited. The guests arrived on a Thursday, late in November, when the roads were cold and the light fell early. Felicity heard the carriages before she saw them. She was at the window of the upper corridor, making an inventory of the linen cupboard, and she watched the first carriage swing through the gates. Lawrence's carriage, black and newly lacquered, because Lawrence had spent a great deal of money in 4 years making Ashcroft Hall look as though it had always been his. Behind it came a second, larger carriage, plainer, with a crest on the door she did not recognize. She went downstairs to do her duty. Lawrence Pembury was not a bad-looking man, and he knew it. He came through the front door with the ease of a man who had never doubted his right to walk through any door he chose, and behind him came a woman in a traveling coat of deep burgundy, dark-haired and self-possessed, moving through the entrance hall with the kind of certainty that said she had walked through a great many impressive doors and found them all deserving of her. Felicity had heard about Helena Byrne. The cook had mentioned her, cautiously, in Felicity's first week. She had been at Ashcroft Hall before. She came and went. The staff understood, without it being said aloud, what she was to the master of the house. The second guest came through the door last, and alone. He was tall, taller than Lawrence by half a head, and he wore no expression in particular. Not the boredom that wealthy men often wore as a kind of armor, and not the careful warmth that people put on when they wish to be liked. He simply looked at the entrance hall the way a man looks at a thing he is assessing. And then he looked at the staff assembled in a line to receive the guests, and then his eyes moved past Felicity the way everyone's eyes moved past her now. She had learned to expect it. She had learned, in fact, to count on it. Later she would learn his name, Adrian Blackwood, the Duke of Hadley. He had come to Ashcroft Hall to discuss a long-running dispute over a stretch of woodland that bordered both Lawrence's property and the holdings of a neighboring trust, a trust the Duke administered. It was, on the surface, a matter of law and maps and old land grants. Felicity did not know yet what it would become. That evening there was a dinner. Felicity did not eat at the dinner. She organized it. She stood at the edge of the dining room to ensure the courses were served correctly, and she watched. Lawrence sat at the head of the table. Helena sat at his right hand, in the chair that had been her mother's chair, in the chair that should, by every right Felicity understood, have been hers. She kept her face still. She had been keeping her face still for 4 years. It was during the soup that Lawrence said it. He was speaking to the Duke about some detail of the land dispute, gesturing with his spoon in a way that made Felicity want to close her eyes, when he paused and said easily, with the offhand assurance of a man stating a simple fact, "My wife will tell you, Helena has always had a better memory for these things than I do." Helena smiled and said something gracious about the boundary in question. Felicity, standing 6 feet away with a pitcher of water, did not move. "My wife." The words landed in the warm, well-lit room and settled there, and no one looked up, and no one looked at Felicity, because no one ever looked at Felicity. And she had planned for that, she had wanted that, and still the words did something to the inside of her chest that she had not prepared for. It was not precisely that she was shocked by the lie. She had expected a lie. Lawrence Pembury's entire presence in this house was a lie. What she had not expected was how it would feel to hear him extend the lie so naturally, so easily, in front of a room full of good silver and warm candlelight, with the soup growing cool in the bowls and Helena sitting in her mother's chair, as though she had always sat there, to hear him speak the lie with the confidence of a man who had said it so many times that he had ceased to notice it was a lie at all. She set the pitcher down very carefully on the sideboard. She told herself to breathe. She thought of her father's library and the things kept behind, the things that only seemed to matter, and she breathed. She thought she had kept her face still. She was wrong about that. Across the table, the Duke of Hadley was not watching Lawrence. He was not watching Helena. From the moment Lawrence said "my wife," Adrian Blackwood had been watching the housekeeper, standing 6 feet away with a pitcher of water in her hands. He had seen something move across her face, something quick and controlled. The kind of thing you only see if you happen to be looking at exactly the right moment. And the Duke had the unsettling feeling that he had been looking at her, without quite deciding to, since she had first appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He had noticed her during the reception. Not as a woman, not the way a man notices a woman at a party, but the way he sometimes noticed people who were doing something quietly and with great care. She had been watching the entrance hall the way he watched rooms, cataloging, calculating, standing exactly where she could see everything without being seen herself. He had thought it odd for a housekeeper. Now he thought it was something else entirely. He watched her set the pitcher down. He watched her lift her chin by the smallest possible bon degree and look at the middle distance with an expression of perfect, professional composure. And he watched her eyes, just for a breath, go somewhere very far away and very dark before she brought them back. He looked down at his soup. He found he was no longer hungry. She came for the library on the 3rd night. Lawrence and Helena had gone to bed early. The Duke, she believed, had retired to his room in the east wing. The hall was silent except for the settling of old timbers and the wind off the fields, the same wind that had blown through her childhood bedroom window, the wind she had grown up listening to. She moved through the dark with a small candle, the way she had always moved through this house, knowing exactly where the floorboards were reliable and where they were not, knowing which door hinges wanted lifting before you turned the handle, knowing the house the way you only know a place you have loved. The library was cold. The fire had been banked hours ago, and the embers were nearly out. She did not relight it. She went straight to the wall beside the east window, to the built-in bookshelves her father had installed when she was very small, and she began, carefully, methodically, without hurry, to press her fingers along the back panel of the lowest shelf. She had been at it for perhaps 10 minutes when she became aware that she was not alone. She went very still. "You are not looking for a book," said the Duke. His voice was quiet, not accusing, simply observational, the way he seemed to observe everything. Felicity took a breath. She straightened and turned, and she found him standing in the doorway in his dressing gown with a candle of his own, his dark hair loose, looking at her with an expression she could not entirely read. She had her story prepared. She had half a dozen stories prepared for half a dozen eventualities. She chose the simplest one. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. I thought I heard something. I came to check." "At the back panel of the lowest bookshelf," he said. She said nothing. He came into the room and set his candle on the reading table, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her at dinner. Not unkindly, but with a directness she was not accustomed to, from anyone. "What is your name?" he said. "Your real name?" The question hit her somewhere unprotected. She had been asked for her name 100 times in 4 years in lodging houses and employment offices and drapers' shops, and she had given the prepared answer each time without flinching. But there was something in the way he said "real" that made the prepared answer stick in her throat. "Weston," she said, "Mrs. Weston." "You watched this room very carefully at dinner," he said. "Not the way a housekeeper watches a room, the way a person watches something that belongs to them." Her heart struck hard against her ribs once and then steadied. "You are mistaken, Your Grace." "Perhaps." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the bookshelf and then at her, and his expression was thoughtful in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. "Mr. Pembury introduced Miss Byrne as his wife this evening." He did. "She is not his wife." It was not a question. She looked at him steadily. "That is not my business to say." "No," he said. "I don't believe it is. I believe your business is that panel behind the shelf and whatever you are looking for inside it." He paused. "I will ask you one more time, and then I will leave it alone entirely, because I can see that you are frightened, and I have no wish to add to it. Who are you?" The candlelight moved across his face. She had spent 4 years teaching herself not to ask for anything, not to want anything, because wanting things was how you got hurt, and giving anything away was how you got found out, and found out meant finished. She looked at him for a long moment. "If you truly mean to leave it alone," she said carefully, "then I will tell you only this. I was here before he was, and I am looking for proof of it." Something shifted in his face. It was not pity. She could not have borne pity. It was something more like recognition, the expression of a man who has heard a sentence he already, somehow, knew. He gave her a small, grave nod. "Then I will leave you to your work," he said. And he took his candle, and he left, and she stood alone in the cold library with her heart hammering, and she did not find the panel that night, but she thought, for the first time in a very long time, that she might not be entirely alone. She had been wrong to think it would be simple from there. Lawrence noticed things. She had underestimated that. He was not a clever man, but he was a watchful one, the way vain men often are, always looking for signs that the world was not regarding him with sufficient admiration, always alert to any suggestion that his position was less solid than it appeared. And he had noticed the Duke at dinner. He had noticed the Duke not watching him. The next morning she heard them from the corridor. Lawrence's voice carrying the smooth, emphatic quality it took on when he was performing confidence he did not quite feel. "You'll find the papers entirely in order, Your Grace. The estate has been in my family's care for 4 years now, all properly documented." "I'm sure it has," said the Duke. His voice gave nothing away. "My wife, Helena, she has quite transformed the place. The south garden alone." "When were you married?" said the Duke, pleasantly, as if the question were of no particular importance. A pause, very brief, but Felicity, who was standing just beyond the doorway with her back flat against the wall, felt it like a change in barometric pressure. "Last spring," said Lawrence. "Congratulations," said the Duke. "Where was the ceremony?" Another pause. "A small affair. Family only." "Of course, a sound of cutlery. Which church?" Felicity held her breath. "St. George's," said Lawrence, smooth now. He had found his footing, Hanover Square. That night she found the panel. It had been there all along, behind the third and fourth volumes of a complete set of commentaries on the laws of England. Her father's quiet joke, she supposed, keeping the truth hidden in plain sight. The panel swung inward with a sound like a slow exhale, and behind it was a tin box, and inside the box were three things. A letter in her father's hand addressed to my daughter, Felicity Ann Wharton, to be opened upon my death, or upon the reaching of her majority, whichever comes first. A signed and witnessed copy of his genuine last will and testament, dated 18 months before his death, and a small pressed flower, a columbine, which had been her mother's favorite, and which meant nothing, she supposed, to anyone else in the world, but which made her sit down on the cold floor and press her hand over her mouth for a very long time before she was able to continue. She was still sitting there when she heard a step behind her. She turned. Helena Burns stood in the doorway. For a moment neither of them spoke. Felicity looked at the woman who had sat in her mother's chair and been called by her name in front of company, and she waited for the calculation to show on Helena's face. The quick mental arithmetic of a woman who has just discovered something valuable. It showed, briefly, and then something else showed underneath it. "He told me the estate was his by right," Helena said. Her voice was flat and careful. "He told me his cousin's daughter had been left out of the will because there were questions about her parentage." "There were no such questions," said Felicity. "No." Helena looked at the tin box and then at Felicity, and her expression was not gentle. Felicity did not think Helena Burns did gentle, but it was something. Honest, perhaps. Tired. "He also told me we would be married in the spring, 2 springs ago, and then the spring after that." Felicity said nothing. "There is a woman in Bath," Helena said. "I believe he has been corresponding with her. She has real money, old money, the kind you can't manufacture by forging a dead man's signature." She paused. "I have suspected it for some months." Felicity kept her face still. "Why are you telling me this?" Helena looked at her for a long moment. "Because," she said, "I am apparently not the only fool in this house, and I find that I am tired of being the only one who knows it." She turned toward the door and then stopped. "He keeps his private letters in the dispatch box under the floorboard behind his desk. He thinks no one knows about it. The cook does. I imagine you would know how to open it if you wanted to look." She left without another word. The Duke came the following afternoon. She had sent him a note, just 4 lines, unsigned, slipped under his door in the early morning, asking if he would come to the library at 2 o'clock. She had not known if he would. She had known somehow that he would. He came in and closed the door behind him, and she set the tin box on the reading table and opened it, and she told him everything. She told him about the will, and about her father's death, and about Lawrence's document, with its shaky, wrong signature, and about the 4 years since. She told him about coming back as Mrs. Weston. She told him about Helena and the dispatch box and the woman in Bath. She told it plainly and in order, without drama, because she was done with managing her own story through omission, and because something in the stillness with which he listened made omission feel unnecessary. When she had finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked at the will on the table. He had read it carefully, twice, without comment, and then he looked at her. "The witness signatures are verifiable," he said. "Old Fairweather will know them, and St. George's, Hanover Square, will have no record of any marriage between Pembury and Miss Byrne, because the marriage did not take place, and a lie spoken at a dinner table is still only a lie." "Yes," she said. "There is also the matter," he said carefully, "of the dispatch box." "There is." He was quiet again. "You understand that I came here on a matter of land rights," he said. "A boundary dispute of no particular consequence to anyone except the trustees I represent. I did not come here expecting to find—" "I know," she said. "I am sorry, I had no one else." He looked at her then, and she made herself look back, because she was done with looking away. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said. "Not one thing." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, the careful control of a man keeping something in, the same control she had been exercising for 4 years, and recognizing it in him was one of the stranger experiences of her life. "I am trying to say that I came for a land dispute, and I find that I am considerably more invested in what happens here than that. I am not certain what to do with that." The room was very quiet. The winter light through the library windows was pale and thin. "You told me you would leave it alone," she said. "And you didn't." "No," he said, "I didn't." "Why?" He considered the question for what felt like a long time. "Because," he said finally, "I have spent most of my life being the person in the room who notices what other people miss. And when I notice something that matters, I am constitutionally unable to pretend otherwise." He paused. "And you matter. That is the short version." She did not know what to say to that. She had not expected it. After 4 years of being the housekeeper no one looked at, the girl in the wrong column of a forged will, the voice that carried no weight in any room that counted, she had not expected someone to simply say, in plain words, "You matter," and mean it as a statement of fact rather than a consolation. She pressed her hands flat on the reading table to stop them shaking. "Then help me," she said. He did. He was thorough, and he was careful, and he was faster than she had expected, because a duke could move through certain kinds of rooms in ways that ordinary people could not. He wrote to Mr. Fairweather that same afternoon. He wrote to the registry at St. George's, Hanover Square. He sent his own man to Bath, quietly, and the following morning, when Lawrence was out inspecting the Southfields with his land agent, the Duke opened the dispatch box behind the desk. Felicity showed him where the floorboard was, and he did not ask how she knew, and found inside it the correspondence with the woman in Bath and 3 or 4 other letters that, taken together, told a story about the forged will and Lawrence Pembury's plans for the Wharton estate that was not a story anyone had told in front of a solicitor yet, but soon would be. Helena produced 2 letters of her own that evening, sitting in the kitchen with the cook and Felicity. She set them on the table with the expression of a woman burning a bridge she had stood on for 3 years and feeling something unexpected about the act of burning it. "He will say I helped him," she said. "You did," said Felicity, "for a while, and then you stopped." Helena looked at the letters. "What becomes of me?" "I don't know," said Felicity honestly, "but I won't compound the wrongs that have been done in this house with another one. Whatever I can do for you, I will." Helena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He called me his wife in front of the Duke. I let him. I knew, when he said it, that you were standing there. I knew you heard it." "I know," said Felicity. "And you said nothing." "I was not ready yet." Helena nodded slowly. "You are very patient," she said. It did not sound precisely like a compliment, but it did not sound like an insult either. It sounded like something she was still deciding about. Lawrence was confronted on a gray Friday morning in the library. Felicity's library, as it would be again, with the genuine will on the table, and the Duke standing to one side, and old Mr. Fairweather arrived by carriage the evening before, small and precise and angrier than Felicity had ever seen him, looking at Lawrence with the expression of a man accounting for a long-standing debt. Lawrence tried charm first, as men like him always do. He tried confusion second, a performance that might have worked on anyone who hadn't read his letters to Bath. He tried anger third, and that was when he looked at Felicity and said, "You have no standing here. This is my house." "No," said Mr. Fairweather with a quietness that carried further than shouting. "It is not." He produced the will. He produced the witness verifications. He produced the statement from the registry at St. George's, which had, as the Duke had anticipated, no record of any marriage. He read aloud, very clearly, a passage from Lawrence's own correspondence that described the forged will as the necessary correction to an otherwise inconvenient inheritance. Lawrence's expression, when he heard his own words read back to him, was the expression of a man watching the walls come down around him and finding he has no contingency. He had spent 4 years building those walls, and they had seemed very solid from the inside, and now they were not. He looked at Felicity. There was something almost surprised in it. She looked back at him with the steadiness she had been practicing for 4 years, and she felt, checking herself carefully, the way she had checked herself for other feelings, nothing that resembled pity, and nothing that resembled hatred either. What she felt was mostly the quiet structural relief of a person who has been walking on a floor that might give way for a very long time, and who has at last reached solid ground. She became Felicity Wharton again in the spring. It was not instantaneous, and it was not clean. Legal things rarely are. But Mr. Fairweather was thorough, and the evidence was considerable, and Lawrence Pembury had made the particular mistake of keeping records of his own wrongdoing in writing, which did not speak well for his long-term foresight. By April, the estate was restored. By May, the south garden was blooming again, and Felicity had moved back into the room that had been hers, and the cook, who had suspected everything for months and said nothing out of reasonable self-preservation, made her a pie to celebrate. Helena left for Halifax shortly before the spring came in. She sent a note, "I find I would like to try a place where no one has an opinion about me yet." H.B. It was, Felicity thought, the most Helena-like communication she could have imagined, and she kept it. The Duke came to call in June. He came correctly, with a letter sent ahead and a proper hour in mind, and they walked in the garden together, in the long evening light. And for a while they talked about the land dispute, which had been quietly resolved as something of a side effect of everything else, and about the state of the Southfield fencing, and about the cook's pie, which he had apparently heard about. And then he stopped walking. "I have been trying," he said, "to find the right time to say something, and I have concluded that there is no right time. So I am going to say it on the wrong one, and trust that you will tell me honestly what you think." She turned to look at him. He had the look of a man not accustomed to uncertainty, doing his best with the condition. She found it, unexpectedly, one of the most honest things she had ever seen on another person's face. "I am aware," he said carefully, "that you have spent the last 4 years in circumstances that took away your choices, and that you have just spent difficult months more recovering them. I have no wish to become another circumstance that does the same. If I say this, and you prefer that things remain as they are, I will accept that entirely, and the next time I call it will be about fencing." She waited. "I would like," he said, "to court you, properly and slowly if you are willing. I would like to find out whether what I think is happening between us is in fact happening, and I would like to do that in a way that gives you room to disagree with me at every stage without consequence." He paused. "That is all. That is the thing I have been trying to find the right moment to say." Felicity looked at him in the long June evening, with the south garden flowering around them, and the old stone of Ashcroft Hall warm at her back. And she thought of all the things that had been decided for her, in all the rooms she had stood in without being asked. The solicitor's office and the lodging houses and the dinner table where she had stood with a pitcher of water and heard her own home offered to someone else. And she thought of the library and the note she had slipped under his door and the way he had come. Slowly, she said, "Yes, I would like that." He did not smile precisely. It was something quieter, the expression of a man who has been braced for an outcome and finds the actual one is better and needs a moment to settle into it. "Then I will come back Thursday," he said, "about the fencing." She laughed. She had not laughed, not genuinely, not the kind that catches you before you've decided to, in longer than she could remember. He came back Thursday. He came back the Thursday after that. He came back through the summer and into the autumn, always properly and always slowly, and she learned that he was quieter than he appeared and funnier than she had expected, and that he paid attention to things in a way that was, once you grew accustomed to it, less unnerving than it was simply accurate. He noticed things. He had noticed her, once standing in a room full of people with a pitcher of water in her hands. She was still not entirely used to it. They were married the following April. Felicity had wanted it at Ashcroft Hall, in the small stone church at the edge of the park where her father was buried and 3 generations of Whartons before him. She wanted to be married in the middle of what was hers, because she had spent 4 years at the outside edge of it, and she was done with edges. She walked up the aisle on her own. Mr. Fairweather had offered, with great formality, to perform the honor, and she had thanked him with genuine warmth, and told him that she had once been walked to a place she did not choose, and that this time she would walk herself. When the minister asked who gave this woman to be married, there was a pause, and into it Felicity said simply, "I do." The Duke, waiting at the front, heard her say it, and she watched him understand the whole of what she meant by it, and she watched something in his face open up the way a room opens when you raise the blinds. He took her hand. It had been her father's church and her grandmother's before that, and the light through the east window fell the same way it had always fallen, over the same stone floor. And Felicity Wharton, who had come home to a house that was not hers and made it hers again by the slow, stubborn act of not leaving, stood in the warmest light in the room and let it fall on her, and for the first time in a very long time she did not make herself small to receive it. She stood up straight and let it find her, which was, she had decided, all that standing in the right light ever required.